Morning, U.S. History 1. It's Mr. C. We're going to do a review like we normally do. And I thought, hey, we didn't have a review. I'm going to go through a review and also walk you through the instructions for how we're going to take our first test over Chapter 16, Part 1, which is the United States Civil War from 1861 to 1862. It's Friday, April 3rd, and I'll give you further examination, questions, and instructions as we go through this review. So this review is based upon the things that we've gone over. So for example, we started out with vocabulary, chapter 16, and to go back over a few things that a lot of people miss, I'm going to go through some of the main things. Please, please, please do not put that Jefferson Davis went to Jefferson Davis Community College or Coastal College as if when he was a boy he would have gone to a school that was named for him. And please don't put Transylvania University. Put where he finally graduated from. Put West Point. This is the point. Jefferson Davis went to West Point. Stonewall Jackson went to West Point. Robert E. Lee went to West Point. P.G.T. Beauregard at the Battle of Fort Sumter went to West Point. Almost if you guess where the person went during this war, it's going to be most likely West Point. The Confederate States of America and their capitals. Not the capital of South Carolina, the first capital of the Confederacy, which we should know because it's Montgomery here in Alabama, and the second capital. Please do not put Danville because you're too lazy. Once you go and Google it and put down Confederate States of America, and the first thing that comes up without ever going into the article or reading anything because we just cut and paste and because we grab the first thing off the shelf, yeah, that's wrong. The second one we've gone over. It's Richmond. It moves to Richmond, Virginia. On to Richmond. So make sure you've got your information right to be ready for this test. There are 11 states, not 13, 11 states. There are 13 stars in the flag because the Confederacy later decides to add Kentucky and Missouri, but those two states never formally seceded. Their governments never seceded. They just had two governments in those states. They had opposition governments where they claimed to be southern states. There are 11 states that seceded that formed the Confederacy. Continuing on, the Anaconda Plan. It's a snake. That's where we use the picture of the snake. It's a snake that squeezes something until it dies. It's using the strategy of exhaustion to be able to squeeze, or you could even say it's a combination of exhaustion and attrition, to squeeze the blood, to squeeze the life out of the Confederacy by using a naval blockade. Robert E. Lee's college experience, like we said, is also West Point. His views on slavery, he was opposed because he thought it was evil, but he didn't think it was so evil it needed to be gotten rid of by the government, and he did not believe that black people were socially or intellectually equal to white people. So he's a very convoluted view on slavery, just like Jefferson Davis. But please don't say that he's against slavery. He's not against slavery. He thinks that it's wrong, but he's not willing to end it. In fact, he's willing to fight on the side that is trying to preserve it. The next thing we went to that I need to make sure that we understand about was that first Battle of Manassas. So, ones that people struggle with on this, please understand who won the battle. The South won the battle. They could have maybe finished the whole war if they'd been able to take it all the way to Washington, but the South definitely won that battle because of the use of railroads that brought troops to reinforce them at the last minute. Here's the section that I want to emphasize. The veterans by the numbers. So if we need to do an analysis question, we needed to think through what does that mean. So what percentage of the total population of all Americans, what percentage of all Americans have served, are serving in the military, meaning they're in right now or they were at some time. And that number, that those of you that got it right, was 8.7%. And that came from this site right here. Veterans by the numbers. Okay? Went up to this graph right here and looked at this graph. I'm sorry, it was 7.6%. 7.6%. So 7.6% of the whole country, let's just round that up, that's 8. 8 out of 100 people. 8 out of 100 people in the whole country, 92 have never served in the military, 8 have. Then I asked the follow-up question, how many of those people, of those 8, how many of those 8 would be between the ages of 18 and 34, what we would call young people? And that was 8.7. So 9, if we round that up, 9% of the 7.6%. So that means that less than one person out of 100, less than one person, you can't find one, less than one person out of 100 between the ages of 18 and 34 are serving or have ever served in the military. And that's an important analysis question, because the reason I put that in there was to begin to help you use history to compare. So you can go, what were things like back then? What are things like now? So far more people served in the military in the Civil War than serve today in 2020. Another thing I wanted to go over then is looking at first-hand accounts. The reason I put first-hand accounts in here was so you could read about regular people doing regular things, even young people, and compare what they were going through, how difficult it was for them in the Civil War compared to what we're going through, because we're going through a difficult time too. Which was harder? Why was it harder? What was similar? So, for example, in one of the stories, what happened, what hardships did Mrs. Mize have to endure? And she was young. She had to help take care of her little brothers and sisters, 3 boys and 3 girls. She was the oldest. There were answers, sure, but more people were concerned about the fact that they didn't have sugar, as if you don't have sugar, you're going to die. What about staying up every night and using a knot of wood, a tiny piece of wood, to try to see with and do work at night? Not playing at night, not talking at night, working at night. Or the fact that to get salt, basic salt, that people came and boiled the dirt from the floor in the smokehouse, in the salt house, so that they could get some salt out of what had fallen off of the pieces of meat in the smokehouse. So taking this piece and using it to compare, how are we similar, compare, similar to what they've gone through with hardships, or contrast, how it's very different from what we're going through and what they went through. Another thing that we went through was the opening of the war review. These were the test question or quiz questions that people missed the most. The first important land battle is Bull Run or Manassas, not Fort Sumter. Fort Sumter is the first battle of the war, yes. What was the first battle of the war? Fort Sumter. What battle started the war? Fort Sumter. But the first important land battle was First Manassas or First Bull Run. What was the result of using infantry tactics of the 1760s? That's the 1760s, that's the Revolutionary War. That's the time in between the French and Indian War and the Revolutionary War, where the weapons were the same, the uniforms were almost identical, the formations were the same, the tactics were the same. And the 1860s, well, they had far more advanced technology, but they were still using the same marching techniques and battle tactics, and so it resulted in horrible, horrible losses. This is the one that people miss the most on this, number 12. Did Lincoln plan to end slavery in the southern states at the start of the war? No, absolutely not. In fact, in his inauguration address, he clearly stated he had no intention of taking slaves away from the southern states. At the beginning of the war, no. So what was the goal of the president and most Northerners at the start of the Civil War? It's the second most missed question. It was to bring the Union back together, to make all the states be united, to return the United States to being the United States, not the United States and the Confederate States. All right, another thing that we went through was leadership in tough situations. Some people did great on this. Some people was really kind of confused. So, for example, let's look at number 6 on this. This also I put in for compare and contrast. So we can think about, here's some things that are similar, and here's some things that are different. And here was the question. D.H. Hill's men arrived at the end of the battle and saved Lee's army from being cut off and defeated. His route back to Virginia, that road that was almost taken away from him. How far, not how long, how far? This is distance, not time. How far did they march before they attacked that afternoon? 17 miles. It was right there in the video. 17 miles. 17 miles. What sport team would that be most like at school? 17 miles. What sport team would that be most like at school? 17 miles. The majority of people answer this question with the football team. So I thought, I must be looking something up wrong. So let's look the distance run per game. Distance run per game. I went to this site. Okay, here we go. Baseball. The average distance run per game for the average player in baseball is .037 miles. That's 4 hundredths, not 0.4, .04 hundredths of a mile in the average game. Not far away from that, football. 1.25 miles. Wait a minute. 1.25 miles for receivers and cornerbacks. Receivers and cornerbacks in the NFL. And in fact, not only is it only for receivers and cornerbacks, but this study by the Wall Street Journal that used biometrics to look at the average NFL game found that most players in the NFL actually only play, not walking, not standing, not sitting on the sideline, 11 minutes in a 3-hour game. So, snap, tackle, run, block, push, ball dead. Back to the line of scrimmage, get set up again. Basketball, 2.55 miles. Okay, that's not quite 17. Tennis, 3 miles, not quite 17. Field hockey, 5.9. Here we go, soccer. This says that midfielders tend to run the most, sometimes reaching nearly 9.5 miles. So soccer would have been a good pick. The best pick would have been cross country. Someone who, once they start, they have to keep going without stopping the whole time until the whole event is over. That's the most like a battle. There's no timeouts. There's no water breaks. There's no halftime. There's no change the sides of the field at the quarter. So try to really think about the question. Think about what it's asking. What's that the most like? Guys that go 17 miles and then without stopping go straight into pushing and attacking and shooting and reloading and shooting and moving to the left and sliding to the right and no breaks in between. Think about what that's the most like. Okay, then another thing that we looked at besides that was the account of actually Antietam itself, the Antietam campaign. Here's where we had the most trouble on this. First, some people still didn't understand what happened in the battle. Lee went into Maryland to try to get more recruits for his army, to take pressure off of Virginia, where constantly the North, the Union, the Yankees were invading, trying to get to Richmond. On to Richmond. Let's get them out of Virginia. Let's pull them away from there. Let's go into Maryland and see if they'll come after us there. And that failed because his plans were lost. Most people finally got that right. His plans were lost, and so McClellan, the Union, the Northern, the Yankee commander, knew exactly. He had the playbook that Lee was using. Who won the battle? Well, even though it was terribly bloody, 23,000 casualties in one day, it was McClellan, even though he won it very, very ineptly. It was a very, very, very sloppy win. But he was the one that was troubling. We need to go back to reading carefully and thinking about what we're asking. Battle. How bloody was the battle compared to battles? So let's go back over some terms. A little fight between a few people that lasts a few minutes, like what happens in a video game, that's called a skirmish. A fight that goes on between hundreds or thousands that takes hours and hours or up to 2 or 3 days, that's a battle. A series of those battles, like a season in a sport, is called a campaign. A series of campaigns linked together is a war. So lots of you all wound up missing this because you compared the Battle of Antietam, which was one day, with wars like World War II or Vietnam. What this question was asking was, yes, we have, as some people wrote, yes, we have way more lethal technologies. We have helicopters. We have guided missiles. We have drones. We have larger guns. We have tanks. We have armored personnel carriers. We have infantry fighting vehicles. Yes, we have all these things that are more lethal. But the day of Antietam is still the bloodiest single day for the United States in any war. More people were killed that day. So bloodiness has nothing to do with technology. The blood that comes out of somebody's head when it gets blown off in 1862 is the same head and the same kind of blood that comes out of someone who gets killed in Afghanistan in 2020. It's the same humanity. There's what's the same is that war is painful. Young men, young 17, 18-year-old men die, and they still have to put themselves into difficult, dangerous situations where if they go across that field, if they cross that airstrip, if they go up the side of that hill, if they go into that cave, they're likely not going to come back. Ironically, though, for all of our advances in technology, it's Antietam that still ranks even more than D-Day, even more than any battle in Vietnam, even more than anything that we fought since then. That's the bloodiest day in U.S. history. So please get that across. Please remember that. And then also we talked about the opening of the war. Oh, we went over that. Sorry about that. Opening of war. Okay. Now, the reason I've gone through these things is to make sure we've got the answers right. I want us to make certain we know the basic vocab. People, places, events. I want us to make certain we understand the opening battles and what the objects were. We also went over strategy. Make certain that when you went through that video that I made for you on strategy, that you understand really what those weaknesses were. Vast differences between the population of the North, the Union, and the population of the South, the Confederacy. Vast differences, and I can just go to that and open that. Strategy is going to be right here. There it is. This one, okay? Remember, there were vast differences between manufactured goods, the things you've got to have to keep on fighting a war, and the iron to make manufactured goods. The difference between railroads, the weakness of the South in being able to get food from Texas, where there were huge herds of beef that could help feed armies on fighting in Georgia and fighting in Virginia. But then what happens when the Mississippi gets cut off? So thinking through those kind of things. And the strategy of the Anaconda Plan. General Winfield Scott, the man who'd fought from 1812, the Mexican War, was still in uniform in 1861 and thought the best way to do this with the fewest losses would be just to squeeze them until eventually they just tap out. But Lincoln, remember this question right here, number 12. Why did Lincoln want to call up volunteers and invade and therefore lead to a war that cost tens of hundreds of thousands of casualties? Because the Anaconda Plan would take too long. Just it by itself, without going for and destroying enemy armies and trying to take the enemy capital, would mean that potentially Lincoln would still be fighting a war that was dragging on, and people were tired of it, and therefore he would lose re-election, and the war would end, and we'd have two countries. We would have the North, the United States of America, and the South, the Confederate States of America. So, here is your task. You're going to open up this file, chapter 16.1. There are only 10 questions on your test. 10 questions. And you are going to write the 10 questions. You're going to write the 10 questions. You have to use at least one question from each of these resources. So I put it up at the top so you can keep track. That's what I'm going to do when I start grading. When I find that you have a question and it came from strategy, then I'm going to put a little tick mark here under strategy and make sure that all these are filled in. So in section 1, there are 7 questions, so that if all you know are facts, if all you can understand are facts, you can still get a C on this test. You write out the question, 2 points. You write out the answer, the correct answer, 1 point. You write out the source. Where did that question come from? Did it come from vocab? Did it come from first battle? Did it come from the Antietam campaign? You do that for 10 questions. You write out 10 questions, you write out 10 answers, and you share with me the source. I'll know as soon as you tell me the source what the question came from, and I'll know the correct answer. Mr. C, does spelling count? Well, of course spelling counts because you're able to use the internet. You're able to use your notes. You're able to use and check on that yourself. You're going to be on a Word document. Absolutely, spelling counts. So spelling counts. Write out 7 questions. Section 2. You're going to write 2 questions, which would allows you to get a B, be above average. 2 questions have to be compare or contrast to the present. Something that you're looking at, and then you're comparing that. How is that similar to what we're going through today, or how things are today, or contrast? How is that very, very different? So you could contrast the differences between casualties, or you could do comparison between how is this battle and what they went through similar to something that we're going through today. Or you could compare hardships, or you could compare difficulties, changes in life. Christmas, in many places we read about, was very, very different. Easter, for us, is going to be very, very different. So questions like that, okay? Be creative. Compare or contrast something from one of those sources, put your source here, what a fact you're looking at, or a story that's being shared from, say, first-hand accounts or leadership in tough situations. And then finally, section 3, analyze and explain. This is where you're going to make a question, again, from one of these sources up at the top. It could be Emancipation Proclamation facts. It could be strategy. And you're going to ask to analyze something. That's a question that is a how or why, or how and why. Why did, or how did. And that's going to require an explanation. So your answer is going to have multiple sentences. Like me asking you, I don't understand how I saved this video. You don't say, cell phone, click it. You say, you go into here, you hit pause, you set up your camera, just like you would explain something to me, you're looking for an explanation on this one, section 3. This is to get the A, to get a full credit. Okay. So write the question down, write down the answer, and again, give the source. I will allow 1 bonus. Now, I don't want trivia. I don't want to know the name of Robert E. Lee's horse. It was Traveler. I don't want to know what eccentric habit Stonewall Jackson had in battle. He sucked on lemons. That's not what I'm looking for. I don't care about that stuff. You know I hate that trivia stuff. It has to be something that involves a Civil War person or event that teaches honor or duty or sacrifice or tragedy. Okay? An example of that would be the bonus that I gave you back on overview, the opening war review, which was here. And it was this bonus question. What was the background between the Union commander and the Confederate commander in this battle? It would require a little bit of work. So, the Union commander, Colonel Anderson, and the Confederate commander, P.G.T. Beauregard, well, Beauregard had been a cadet learning artillery at West Point when Anderson was the instructor, was the professor for artillery. So first of all, it was teacher and student. But Beauregard was such a good student, did so well at artillery, using cannons to bombard things, that when he graduated, Anderson asked him if he would like to no longer be a student, but to be his co-worker, to work with him, to join the faculty as an assistant instructor. So Beauregard did. He became an instructor with Anderson, who'd been his teacher at West Point of artillery. So at the opening battle of the Civil War, 2 guys that had worked together every day, gotten their coffee, seen each other in the morning every day, said goodnight, went home on the same base every day, were facing each other, and it was the student who was bombarding his teacher, who I'm sure the teacher had to be thinking, man, I wish that had anybody except my top student, who's the one that's bombarding us right now. And so he surrendered to the student that he had taught artillery to. That shows what of those things that I talked about. That's tragic that this war ripped apart people who were friends and classmates and family and sometimes neighbors who fought on opposite sides against each other because they had different views of how this country should operate and how we should treat people and what makes right and what makes wrong. You have the rest of the weekend to complete this. There is no time limit on this. So I'm giving you an extension of until Sunday night at midnight. You may use all the resources listed, and for the bonus, you may use anything that you would like to look up. It just has to be limited to the first 2 years of the war, 1861 to 1862. And again, whenever you ask the question and give the answer, if you got it from someplace other than the stuff we've gone through, then make certain that you put the source, the book, or the website, or the video that you watched to be able to get that answer. Good luck. You have a 10-question test. You're creating the question. You're answering the question correctly with giving the correct answer. And then you're also giving me the source. Make certain when you get done, you go back up to the top of your test and you check and make certain that when you go back through each of your questions, check off and make certain that you have used every one of these at least once. Since there are 10 questions and there are 6 areas. Let me go back over this just to make certain. I will give credit. You may put a check here if you used leadership in tough situations or first-hand accounts. You could use both if you want. You could use a leadership in tough situations question for compare or contrast and a first-hand accounts for compare or contrast. But you only have to use one to get credit for that category. Good luck, and God bless you all. I wish we could be together and I could answer your questions while you raised your hands. I miss our discussions in class. I miss us being able to take sides and have debates. I hope that someday we'll be able to get back to class the way it used to be. If you have any questions, email me. Good luck.